Welcome to QTalks, everybody. How's everyone doing tonight? Thank you so much for coming out. I'm Nicole Deco. I am the Associate Director of Equality Utah. We're the state's advocacy organization for LGBTQ Utahns. We do education, outreach, and political advocacy. I'm so excited that everyone's here tonight. We have a great crowd here. I'd like to thank DJ Jayski for introing us. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Huntsman Family Foundation and Century Financial. We couldn't do this work without them. Let's give them a big round of applause. I'd also like to thank everyone joining us tonight on our live stream. We have folks down at Southern Utah University in Cedar City. We have people at Weber State. We have folks at Snow College. We have people in USU Eastern. We have people in Logan, St. George, Moab, Provo, and even in Spring City, Utah. Let's give them a round of applause. We have such a cool lineup tonight. This is our first QTalks of the year, and it's going to be incredible. I'm so excited for our lineup. We have a transgender architect. We have a DNA equality movement leader. We have a immigration activist, and we have a state senator. Can you believe all those folks? Let's give them a round of applause. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. His name is Alray Nelson. Alray is currently the Director of Community Partnerships at Teach for America and the founder of the Coalition for DNA Equality, the largest LGBTQ organization in the Navajo Nation. Alray mentors LGBTQ and Two-Spirit youth. He lives in New Mexico with his partner Brennan and is serving his first year as the board chairman of Equality New Mexico. Let's give it up for Alray.
Thank you for that great introduction, Nicole. I'm going to go ahead and start us off first with a really great news clip that was broadcasted all across the country several times now at friends that on the East Coast have said they actually heard this newscast a couple of months ago, so I know that they're still playing it. But let me go ahead and play this news clip for you all first.
Same-sex marriage is not legal everywhere in the United States. The Supreme Court's decision in June does not extend to Indian reservations. Only a dozen of the 566 U.S. tribes recognize same-sex marriage. In fact, the country's largest tribes, the Cherokee and the Navajo, have laws specifically prohibiting the unions. Laurel Morales from member station KJZZ reports from Flagstaff, Arizona.
It's hard to tell Alray Nelson is crying behind his mirrored sunglasses. You can't help but get emotional when he talks about this summer's U.S. Supreme Court ruling that decided same-sex marriage was constitutional. Nelson says he and his partner Brennan Yanni have mixed feelings.
We both know now that if we leave the Navajo reservation, that our relationship's validated off the reservation. But that's a big statement within itself too, is that in our own home community, our relationship's not valid. So
that's because a decade ago, when many states approved laws defining marriage between a man and a woman, Navajo lawmakers drafted the Dene Marriage Act, a law that prohibits and refuses to recognize same-sex marriage.
We can, yes, remove ourselves from our community and go get married, like say in a city in San Francisco or in Albuquerque, or let's say we go to a local border town like Farmington or Gallup. But that's not our community. That's not where we're from. Our songs and those prayers that we're both raised with as traditional young people is located here. The ceremonies are conducted here.
Nelson was raised by traditional grandparents in Beshpito, Arizona, a tiny rural Navajo community. He and his partner want to get married, so they're speaking with an attorney and may challenge the Dene Marriage Act in tribal court. The lawmakers who passed that act said the purpose of marriage is to create a family. Navajo Council Delegate Jonathan Hale says that's what his constituents, who are mostly elders, tell him.
they stand with their viewpoints as far as what marriage is, was between a man and a woman.
The Navajo marriage ceremony focuses on fertility and procreation.
You know, holding those traditional values, that is what they stick to, because out of that relationship, of course, comes a next generation of both families, and that's been carried on through.
June's Supreme Court ruling did not apply to the Navajo or any other tribe because tribes are not parties to the U.S. Constitution. Lindsay Robertson directs the Center for the Study of American Indian Law and Policy. He says Congress could theoretically pass a statute that affects Indian country, but he says that's not likely because of how Congress understands its pledge to serve as guardians in American Indians' best interests.
And for the past 40 years or so, that tribe's best interest standard has meant that Congress has supported tribal self-government.
But Robertson says the U.S. Bill of Rights extends to tribal jurisdictions through the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. Claims made under that law must be heard in tribal court. So the Navajo Supreme Court could eventually hear a challenge to the Dene Marriage Act. Members of the Cherokee, Seminole, and other tribes with laws that forbid same-sex marriage could potentially use the Indian Civil Rights Act to challenge those laws in their tribal courts. For NPR News, I'm Laura Morales in Flagstaff.
There are 566 federally recognized tribes all across the United States. This does not include the communities that represent the Kingdom of Hawaii, and also the many corporations that represent the interests of our brothers and sisters from the great state of Alaska. Within the state of Utah, the land that we stand on today is stolen land. It's land that originally was inhabited by the Dene Navajo people, the Shoshone, the Goshute, the Paiute, and the Ute Indian tribal nation. So I would like to recognize the sacredness of this land that we stand before today here in the city of Salt Lake. In addition to that, it is said that 4,000 Navajo people call the city of Salt Lake home. About 5,000 plus Navajo people reside within the territorial boundaries of the Utah portion of the Navajo Nation, which sits between the San Juan River and the border of Arizona. When we talk about this idea of sovereignty and sovereign nations, it's important for you all to know that over the last, I would say 4.5 years now, organizers of the Navajo Nation, from the trans community, LGBTQ youth leaders, elders, grandmas, grandpas, and even our own champions within the Navajo Nation government have stepped up and said that we need to do something. We need to actually politically organize against those tribal lawmakers across the country that will continue to discriminate against the LGBTQ and Two-Spirit communities all across this great country of ours. Dene Equality was founded in 2013 by my partner, Brennan Yanni, and I. We brought together a bunch of activists, a bunch of community leaders, elders, even cousins into his living room, and we had a conversation because we were hearing rumors at the time that the Navajo government was gearing up to pass some very anti-discriminatory laws that directly impact our lives, that would directly impact our community on a very different level. And so we said, we're going to get politically organized, and that's what we did. So now Dene Equality has become one of the largest LGBTQ orgs in the country that's advocating for indigenous communities. We're noticing all across the country that there's an increase in youth suicides in these communities. We're seeing a lot of border town discrimination, not only discrimination towards our trans men and women, but discrimination on the basis of these people being Native themselves, having a darker skin color. We're also seeing an increase in gender violence being perpetuated against our Navajo trans women. There's a lot of unreported hate crimes that are also going on in these communities. In addition to that, there are no protections that are outlined by Navajo law, not only for the LGBTQ community, but also for our original fight, and that was for marriage equality on Navajo. So same-sex couples, even as of today, if you have a state recognized marriage license, that particular marriage document is not recognized by our government. And we're working to change that. So when we look across our country, when I call it our America for Native people, 4% of the Dene population identify as LGBTQ. That's actually a really big number. In addition to that, we also notice that Navajo youth are 3 times more likely to commit or attempt suicide than white LGBTQ youth. 28% of youth have reported that they were physically removed from their homes. In addition to that, about 45% of Navajo youth were physically harassed, whether it's in their communities or in their schools, for being LGBTQ. So that's, of course, something that we need to work towards and making sure we end that. All across the history of this country, we know intuitively that this country's history is not something, in many cases, that people of color, especially indigenous communities, can be proud of. One of them, of course, is a sad and dark time in our history, which happened first with the termination period, where the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government felt like the best policy was to exterminate Native people, the indigenous populations of this country. After Congress and at the time congressional leaders felt that it would actually cost more to exterminate all Native people in this country, let's go on a campaign to eradicate their tradition, their language, and steal their identities and eradicate and end those languages. So you had the boarding school systems that were created with the philosophy that we're going to kill the Indian but save the man. And so you notice that in these photos here, you had Native youth removed from their communities, removed from their homes and taken away from their tribal nations. There's stories of these Native youth coming back home and not being able to recognize their grandparents or mothers anymore, or even speaking the language because all they could speak was English. In addition to that, when I look at my own family, my last name is Nelson. That's actually, you can trace that back to Scotland and Ireland. It was my great-great-grandfather's side, on my father's side of the family, he actually chose that name out of a hat on a chalkboard. There's a lot to be proud of, though. And the reason why I brought up the boarding school history is that Christian leaders, a lot of these schools were Christian-led and government-led. They tried to erase that history, as I meant, and that history includes how we honored and revered LGBTQ identities. Navajo people traditionally believed that we actually had 5 genders. In addition to that recognition of those genders, we had the Navajo creation story that all of us were brought up with in our oral tradition that tells us that Nukle, as we call them, members of the LGBT community actually took on some prominent roles and were actually in a position of saving the tribe at that time because of a dispute that happened between men and women. One of those leaders is Hashtin Kla, who traditionally Navajo medicine people at home usually tend to learn about 2 ceremonies, and it's usually stuck with your gender, so you have a medicine person that only does male ceremonies and female ceremonies. Hashtin Kla actually learned 8 of them. And he's one of the only people in our history that knew those 8 ceremonies and could conduct it for both male and female participants in those ceremonies. In addition to that, you have this amazing trans woman, Ashtish, who was a leader for Two-Spirit people in the Crow Nation. She also only dressed in females' clothing. She actually was a warrior. And her name, I have to translate her name here, but Ashtish, she received that name after the Battle of Rosebud, and it means finds them and kills them. Definitely a fierce warrior. The last individual that I admire a lot is, we probably heard of her, is Wewa, who is a cultural ambassador for the Pueblo Zuni in New Mexico. Wewa, there's a story of how she was invited by the White House and different socialites in Washington, D.C. This idea of an Indian princess, they say it originated from her visit to Washington, D.C., where she actually captivated high society, as they said. In addition to that, President Grover Cleveland actually personally invited her to the White House for dinner just because of her popularity at the time. But what Wewa and her history for the Pueblo Zuni continues to be an example of what it means of holding on to that connection of LGBTQ before Stonewall and before the founding of this country. So when we talk about after Stonewall, these are some of the things that the Coalition for Denied Equality is doing currently. We're working with tribal lawmakers to draft up an anti-discrimination policy within the Employee Policy and Procedures document for the Navajo government that will now protect LGBTQ-identified tribal employees. In addition to that, we're working to repeal the Diné Marriage Act before the Navajo Nation Supreme Court, and I see that happening within the next 2 years, perhaps by 2019. Alongside that effort, we're working on making amendments to the Navajo Bill of Rights that will actually state in there that LGBTQ is a protected class under Navajo law. So we're very close to doing that. The last and most important thing that's been so dear to my heart is how we're going into schools and working with school leaders and with administrators to create a comprehensive Brave Spaces program, a program that is very inclusive to the identities of Indigenous LGBTQ leaders. Because you have your Safe Spaces program, Diné Equality is moving forward with a Brave Spaces program. So now that our LGBTQ youth going to schools on the Navajo Nation will actually be empowered with their own identity and those stories that I'm sharing with you now. There are 4 major pillars for Diné Equality where some bigger accomplishments this year. One is our community outreach program. We've done a fantastic job, and I want to thank our organizers, especially our strong Navajo trans women at home that continue to actually take the helm and lead forward the work of this organization in the communities. Alongside our community outreach program is the Navajo Nation is going to host its first, we hosted our first ever Diné Pride this past summer. There's about 500 people that attended, which was amazing. But this coming summer, we're going to be hosting the 2nd annual Diné Pride, and we're really looking forward to the support of Equality Utah at being at that Pride event in Window Rock, which is the capital of the Navajo Nation. The last part is that we're actually getting politically organized. Now when you go to Window Rock on the Navajo Nation, you ask a tribal lawmaker about Diné Equality. In many cases, we'll have them shaking in their boots because they know that we're politically organized. That within one call of action, one Facebook post, a couple of emails, we can garner up over 3,000 to 5,000 people on Navajo that support our work and can call out a tribal leader for their bigotry. So these are some photos that I would like to just show with you very quickly of some of the amazing work that you can see with your own eyes of what Diné Equality is doing in the community. So, Hajongo Nashado is a phrase, it's a prayer, it's part of a prayer. Navajo people, they're traditional, say this prayer every morning 4 times. Say Hajongo Nashado, Hajongo Nashado, Hajongo Nashado, Hajongo Nashado. 4 times for the directions. It's translated into English as in beauty may I walk. That is the motto for Diné Equality moving forward. It's something that we feel will not only resonate with traditional Navajo elders, but it also will make Navajo youth feel empowered that they are beautiful, that they should have pride for who they are, and that things are going to be okay and we're going to be there fighting for them. So I went over about a minute over time, but I just want to say in my conclusion here, thank you to Troy and his amazing staff at Equality Utah for providing me this invitation to just share a little bit more about the work that Diné Equality is doing. Please like our Facebook page. If you can contribute, please contribute to our work. I'm looking forward to Equality Utah taking part as one of our thought partners for the upcoming 2nd annual Diné Pride. But in addition to that, I wouldn't be standing here today, I wouldn't be the man that I am today if it weren't for my mother, Arlene, and all my sisters, Linnea, Alvina, and Aline, who are watching on Facebook Live. But in addition to that, so many good people in my life. But that one person that really comes down to, like, that's my strength, the person that I continue to always think about when I wake up in the morning, when I go to sleep at night, is my partner, Brennan. We've been together for 7 years. We wear our wedding bands. I proposed to him a year ago. Brennan, in many cases, he's the social worker, so he has to stay at home and he works with families back in the Navajo Nation. But he told me about 3 years ago when we were beginning this work for Diné Equality that I may not be there standing beside you physically I may not be there with you on all the trips you're going to be doing to speak about this work. I may not be there at your community meetings to speak on your behalf as well. But so what I can make is a commitment to you, and it's a vow that I will not push forward of us getting married legally, that's recognized by the federal government or the state, until the Navajo Nation can recognize this marriage. And so we're going to hold off, and that's our commitment to this movement, is that we're not going to get married legally until he and I can do it at home on the Navajo Nation. The Navajo people are a strong people. We believe in protecting and strengthening its sovereignty. Diné equality is going to continue to play a small role in actually rewriting the history of the Navajo people as we move forward. But to all those indigenous and native youth out there that may be watching or may watch this video, the message is clear, is Hojogo Nashado. You will walk in beauty, and you should have pride in that. Because regardless of the history of this country, regardless of the shittiness of politics that we're currently seeing today, the native people, the original people of this land, were recognized and revered and honored you. And that is what it means to be truly an indigenous, truly an American, someone that's proud to call this country home. So as I look 4 years down the road, I'm looking forward to Diné equality following repealing the Diné Marriage Act. I'm looking forward to me finally hearing Brennan say I do on Navajo land. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alray. That was incredible. Thank you for sharing your story and for coming and joining us tonight. Our next QTalks speaker is incredible as well. I'm so excited that she's here tonight to share her journey and her story. Lori Lee Hall was trained as an architect in New York. Today she practices in Salt Lake City. She is a member of the board of directors of Affirmation, an LGBTQ Mormon support network, and founder of the Families and Gender Variance Project. She also is a facilitator of transgender programs at Encircle House in Provo, Utah. She is married to her spouse of 32 years, and they have had 5 children and 12 grandchildren. Let's give Lori Lee Hall a great QTalks welcome.
See the clock if I'm looking over the podium like that. Maybe I can just ignore it. Thank you. I had no idea I was taught tonight. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Yes, I'm tied to a podium. It's just the way it is. Deal with it. I've given hundreds and hundreds of talks, most of them with a podium, so I have to have my safe space, so hold it for me. Many years ago, I attended a powerful and vulnerable presentation made by a man who was once a commercial airline pilot. He certainly looked the part, at least the way I think of airline pilots. He was tall, he had a chiseled physique, and was as handsome as could be. This man went on to describe how wonderful his life as a pilot had been, the respect and the prestige it had offered him. He explained that how being an airline pilot had become his identity. It was his go-to answer when others would ask, "Who are you?" And he would answer, "I'm an airline pilot." until in his late 30s, when his eyesight failed and he could no longer pilot safely. Overnight, his identity was gone, and suddenly he felt very lost. The remainder of his talk that night focused on how he came to realize that he was really much more than whom he was professionally, that he had many identities that were facets of who he truly was, and he admitted that he had allowed his life to get very out of balance by focusing almost exclusively on his professional identity, which he ultimately learned was much more fragile than he'd ever imagined. He then spoke about how he'd worked for some time to develop more fully all of the important parts of his identity of himself, including remaking himself professionally. But what's interesting is I cannot remember what he went on to do for work after that, and I think that was the point. As humans, we are all a compound of many identities. Some are inherent to our nature, some are chosen during our life's journey, and many, sadly, may be imposed upon us by the will of others. Inherent identities are those that we neither chose nor were placed upon us. For example, I am naturally and inherently left-handed. But as I was a youth and started school, I chose also to identify with a group of people, with others who were left-handed and living in the unrighteous right-handed world. Both of my grandmothers were also naturally left-handed, but one of them was forced during grade school to live as a righty because the education system around a century ago believed that left-handedness was harmful and wrong. That choice imposed upon her by the will of others remained with her throughout her 92-year life. Unfortunately, sometimes imposed identities can become like a prison where we may never be able to escape. Sometimes we choose an identity out of fear. For example, like choosing to walk when we truly yearn to fly, because we believe we might be safer if we stay on the ground. In my childhood dreams, I was always a girl. I knew I was a girl, and I was at peace with that knowledge. I also frequently dreamed that I could fly and do many other wonderful things. Over time, reality never felt as wonderful or as safe as did my dreams. Growing up, I was given the opportunity to work alongside my dad in his auto repair shop. It was the life that I knew, and it could have been easily the identity that I had chosen to live throughout life. But Dad also told me that whatever I chose to do with my life had better be something that I really enjoyed doing, because I would have to do whatever it was for a very long time. So ultimately, I chose to leave home and all of its safety and pursue an education in architecture at a university whose annual student costs before scholarships exceeded our family's annual income. I had never met an architect before, but somehow I found the courage to go after this choice and believed that someday I would become very good at it. In time, that identity choice, made with faith, led to a wonderful career that has taken me all over the world. Simultaneously, as I was boldly heading off to architecture school, I also knew that I was female, and that living as female was what I needed and wanted to do. But I had been assigned male at birth, raised by my family as male, despite my occasional wanderings otherwise, and was socialized in school just what it meant to be a boy and how to become a man. Looking back, in reality, this isn't much different than my grandmother being forced to write right-handed. Despite these internal convictions at that time that I was definitely not male, I was completely unaware, this would have been in the late 1970s, how it could have been possible for me to live otherwise. So I pressed on into adulthood the only way that I could, determined to live according to this imposed male identity. living a life walking on the ground, because to me that seems so much safer than authentically flying. I deliberately buried my female identity, not realizing that by so doing, I had chosen to step into a confining cell that would over time become my prison. As the years passed, every decision, each life benchmark reinforced my male identity and solidified the bars and the walls of that prison cell until there seemed to be no possible escape. There was far too much at stake. I was a prominent LDS church leader, and I was the church's chief architect for its most sacred buildings. I had a family and a very safe and beautiful life. So many identities that afforded me so many privileges. Male, ecclesiastical leader, respected teacher, architect, husband, father, grandfather, and so on. But I reached a point where my living as male was such a soul-crushing lie that it became a case of claiming my female identity, live authentically or perish. But how could that be? All that I appeared to be and was would have to be put at risk. To finally live authentically as the woman that I knew myself to be, every safe and privileged identity would have to be placed on the altar, if you will, as a potential sacrifice. My identity socially, professionally, culturally, my family, community, everything. Many of you, especially so many young people, face a similar challenge. It may seem so insurmountable to break the chains of these false or imposed identities that ending one's story early seems like it might be the only answer. It often did for me. Too many find no solution in time. Far too many precious ones are lost to us each year. But I stand before you today to affirm that every one of us can break free of false or imposed identities and claim our truth, stand in it, and build a beautiful and authentic life. I chose life. I chose to live. I chose my own gender identity. I chose to live authentically. I sought to transition gender presentation and remain on my job. Instead, I lost my employment and all connections to my profession within the community. I began to attend my church services authentically and tried to maintain fellowship in my spiritual community. Instead, I was excommunicated and ostracized. Family relationships became strained, separated, or severed. My roles in our family changed significantly. Supposed friends disappeared, many angry opponents emerged. In very short order, it seemed that I had sacrificed my professional, spiritual, social, and cultural, and family and community identities in order to claim my one core gender identity. About this time last year, I really thought I had lost everything that I had had, and I had never been happier. Losing my employment allowed me to immediately complete my legal name change and gender marker changes and accelerate my presentation transition. I became a Lyft driver, which consisted of late-night running students and others between drinking parties and bars. Met a lot of people. Some of you are here tonight. Losing my church membership afforded me the chance to think carefully about my beliefs and moral compass and to be free to act for myself. Changes in family structure, loss of former associates, and the necessity of moving from my former home and community has given me the chance to relocate, become involved in many meaningful forms of community service, and find so many new, loving, wonderful friends. My relationships are now deeper and so much more profound. Life has become so much brighter, and I feel like I am living now in glorious Technicolor, like when Dorothy first landed in Oz. These new friendships have given me the opportunity to start my own architectural practice when no one else would hire me. I am now blessed to be able to practice my craft as my authentic self. And here I stand a year later, and instead of losing all my identities, I have been able to claim my gender and rebuild all my other identities into a cohesive and authentic whole. There have been some trade-offs, of course, but I find the new roles that I have created of advocacy, alliance, coaching, and training to be so much more fulfilling. I have learned that my past prominence has also given me a voice to be able to speak on behalf of those who walk a similar journey. Having a voice is a great opportunity and responsibility. I view the chance to interview or to speak in a public forum like this to be a chance to offer a precious gift, a part of my soul. I would not have chosen this journey that I now find myself on, but I will lovingly embrace all whom I find along the way. I will walk with them, listen to them, and learn to love more fully. And I will give the gift of reporting all my experiences. I invite all to join with me who seek to love more fully and with unfettered hearts, to live this new year with greater inclusivity. Join me in acknowledging with gratitude the magnificent multiplicity and beauty found throughout all of creation, and most particularly among our fellow human travelers. May we recognize the divine design evident in individuality and interact with greater sensitivity, compassion, and empathy. May we obtain the capacity to transcend a simple awareness of diversity and learn instead true inclusivity, holding safe space for every soul among us, inviting all to have a seat at the table, that with these stirrings of inclusivity, we may listen to each other to learn, and as we learn, to respect each other's path and walk together in love. We know that history has seen too much malfaction. May we receive grace, that we may have the strength and integrity to bend the moral arc, to now eliminate inequality, segregation, or marginalization of persons due to race, class, belief, or gender, orientation, or identity, or any other divinely granted characteristic. That no one be excluded or marginalized evermore, that every soul may be free to live authentically as they have been created. Only then can we hope to be truly loved and to love. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, for sharing your journey and for inspiring us all. That was incredible. I hope our live streamers are still with us. Let's keep going. We have an incredible speaker up next, Luis Garza, who is the executive director of an organization here in Salt Lake City that I admire a lot. Luis Garza is the executive director of Comunidades Unidas. He has been involved in community affairs for the past 10 years. He's accredited by the U.S. Department of Justice Bureau of Immigration Appeals to provide immigration services in Utah. How incredible is that? Let's welcome Luis to QTalks. Let's hear it for him.
Okay. So tonight, for the very first time in my life, I want to say out loud and in public that I am a proud gay man. For many, many years, for my entire life, I have decided to use other labels to define who I am. Immigrant, Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, but always hiding that other side of me, of being gay. But not anymore. Right now, I couldn't be more proud to be part of the LGBTQ community and to be here, with all of you tonight. Today, I will be talking a little bit more about my immigrant experience here in the United States and also the intersectionality between immigration and the LGBTQ community. And then I'll leave you with 2 action items that you can take so we can all build a better community. So I was born and raised in Monclova, Coahuila. It's a medium-sized town on the northeast side of Mexico. My family was pretty conservative, not very religious, but still conservative in many different ways. I remember my dad telling me and my 2 brothers how he always prayed that none of his sons will be gay. So to me, that was something. I always knew I was different, but hearing words like that obviously made me feel like being gay was the worst thing that could happen to me. So I decided to hide. And I decided to not explore that side of my identity. Being gay in Mexico is very difficult. There's a lot of homophobia, machismo, and even though a lot of people claim that they support the LGBTQ movement and rights, just last year, thousands of people marched on the streets of Mexico to rally against marriage equality. So there's still a very long way to go. There's a lot of oppression in Mexico. There's a lot of oppression here in the United States. Oppression against immigrants, oppression against LGBTQ communities. The difference is that here in the United States, I can stand up and I can speak up and rally against those systems of injustice so we can all advocate for the improvement of our communities. And unfortunately, I cannot do the same in Mexico. So as I was growing up and reaching adolescence, I felt like I needed something more. Like I needed to explore, I needed to be in different places and meet new people. So I begged my parents to send me to the United States for a year to learn English. They were very hesitant at first, but then they decided to support my dreams. They talked to some friends of friends who knew somebody who lived here in the US, and they arranged for me to live with the host family because they were not able to afford a traditional foreign exchange student program. So at the age of 16, I decided to move here to Bountiful, Utah, to live with a Mormon family. I didn't know Utah before, I didn't know Mormonism before, so it was quite a culture shock for me, as you can imagine. But I remember my first few weeks at Woods Cross High School, how I realized that there was not a lot of people like me. And there was 2 identities that were, like, I quickly learned about, one, that here in the US I was called a Latino or Hispanic. So I researched that and I fully embraced that identity. And I looked for other people that were like me, other Latinos in school. There were not that many. And when I reached out, then I also realized that I'm not only Latino, but I'm also an immigrant whose main language is Spanish. And many of them didn't speak Spanish, so it was hard for me to connect with them as well. So it was hard for me to integrate into the school community. And looking back now, I realize how my migration to the United States disrupted my growth. And it really made it more difficult for me to realize my true identity. I was too focused on learning a new language, struggling through a new culture, trying to get good grades, and just worrying about the regular things that teenagers and high schoolers worry about, that I completely forgot the rest of me, and I didn't really give a chance for myself to explore. Then I finally, I was making some progress in school. I was feeling like I was learning more, and I got the great privilege of obtaining a scholarship to go to the University of Utah. So I decided to stay here and take advantage of that opportunity. And my college experience was pretty similar to my high school, that I was too focused on getting good grades so I can keep the scholarship, and I was really not trying to do anything more, and really continue to hide my identity and continued to not fully embrace who I am. And then I continued with college. I went on to grad school. I got a job. I climbed through the ladder. I'm now the executive director of Comunidades Unidas, Communities United, an immigrant rights organization. We're an immigrant rights organization focused on fighting for equality for all of Utah families. And so a lot of people will say in the traditional sense of the word that I was pretty successful living the American dream. But inside of me, I was still struggling. I felt uncomfortable in my own skin. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like I will disappoint my family, my friends, my colleagues, and my own community if I embraced my queerness. So then I just decided to continue hiding. And even though I was a part of an organization very progressive and very all fighting for rights, I still felt like I couldn't be myself. But then finally, around 2014, it was in December, I decided that I will come out to my family. And then on my way to Mexico, I was driving to my hometown, then I got a phone call saying that my dad had passed away unexpectedly. So that was the most difficult situation that I ever dealt with. I felt like a piece of me died with my dad. And the most hurtful part is that I never got to tell him who I am and my true identity. And the only thing that makes me feel better is that I think he would have been eventually okay with it, and he would have fully embraced me and been happy for me, for who I am. But then obviously I decided to not say anything to my family and deal with that with the process of our loss. And then it wasn't until 2016 that another incident happened, and it was the shooting in Orlando. And to me, that was another issue that really spoke very close to my heart, because I felt like it was a direct attack on my community, as Latino, as immigrant, as LGBTQ. So I really felt like it was my duty to speak up and not stay quiet anymore. I felt like it was my time for me to speak out and say the need for all of us to create better spaces for our community, for our community both in the LGBTQ and immigrant communities to thrive. But then I realized that not a lot of people have the same privilege that I do, that I'm able to speak out. That when I came to this country, I had the documents, where I had the financial support from my parents, and then my lighter complexion, I'm sure, made it easier for me as well. But unfortunately, there's thousands and thousands of LGBTQ undocumented community members that are struggling right now. They have to come out of two closets. One is undocumented, the other one is LGBTQ. And I cannot imagine what community members, undocumented dreamers, children of undocumented families, what they're going through right now. How can they focus on themselves? How can they focus on building their identity and finding who they truly are when they have to worry about their DACA permit expiring, when they have to worry about the future of the DREAM Act, when they have to worry about their parents being separated and their families being torn apart? We cannot let this happen. I really think that this is our time for us to stand up for immigrant families and not be complicit. I think it's really important for us in both the immigrant rights movement, the LGBTQ movement, to create spaces that are welcoming for our both communities. I remember going to LGBTQ spaces where I braced myself for the inappropriate comments, or the overt or subtle racism, or the feeling that I didn't belong. And then I also remember going to Latino spaces or immigrant spaces where I felt the homophobia, or I felt the machismo, and I made myself smaller so other people can feel comfortable around me. And I feel like that is not right. That is not something that our youth should go through, because it's something that really hinders their dreams and their future. So I think this is really our time for us to build a connection, a stronger connection between the two movements. We're natural allies. We should be supporting one another even more. I think it's time for us in the Latino community, in the immigrant community, to stand up and speak out and be stronger allies of the LGBTQ community. And I think it's the same for the LGBT community to stand up and be a vocal and strong ally of the Latino community and immigrant community. So today, as I mentioned, I want to leave you with 2 action items. One of them is obviously very relevant right now, that I would like to ask each one of you to contact your representatives in Congress and ask them to support the DREAM Act. Right now, thousands of undocumented youth are still in limbo with their dreams put on hold. The DREAM Act would allow them to have a pathway to citizenship, protection from deportation, and also to fight for their future and their dreams. But then also, it's not just about our youth. It's not just about the people with DACA or dreamers. It's about all of our families. We need to continue to advocate for comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship, because that's the only way that our communities will be able to fully thrive and come out of the shadows and really live the American dream to its fullest extent. So I think it's really important, and I encourage all of you to please make a phone call, contact your legislators, tweet them, whatever you need to do to make sure that we keep the DREAM Act and the immigrant rights in the forefront. I know there's many issues going on right now, but we need to be vocal, and we need to make sure that our voices are heard. And second, I want to ask you to reach out, to make connections and build bridges with others, to reach out to maybe somebody who's a neighbor who's coming from a different country, or somebody from a different race or religion, because I think it's really important that we share our stories, that we build connections, and that we have conversations. I think it's important for us to allow ourselves to feel uncomfortable and have difficult conversations. And I think it's really necessary for all of us to share those stories, because it's through those stories that we find our common humanity, that we find the opportunity to build bridges and to build partnerships so we can work together to advocate for one another. So I really encourage all of you to make those connections, and I promise that I will do my part to continue building bridges between the LGBTQ community, the Latino and immigrant community, but I ask each one of you to also do the same. So please do that. And I want to thank all of you for being here, and also Equality Utah for allowing me to speak and being part of this, and I look forward to strengthening our relationship, because I know we can accomplish so much together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luis. He really touched on that intersectional piece and really every part of our mission, the education, outreach, even the political awareness piece that is so important and integral to everything that we're doing at Equality Utah, and that coalition building, and it's just really critical at this juncture and something that we all need to keep in mind. So thank you so much for your remarks and for sharing your story. Our next and final speaker is Senator Thatcher, and we're really honored to have him here tonight. I'm going to read his bio. Senator Daniel Thatcher was elected to serve in the Utah State Senate in 2010. He is most recognized for his work with access to justice, mental health services, suicide prevention, and school safety. Let's give Senator Thatcher a QTalks welcome.
Hi. I know what you're thinking. Who invited this straight Republican? Little known fact, this straight Republican used to be a DJ. Thank you. So, the reason I'm here today is to talk about the status of hate crimes in Utah. So first, a little sidebar. This particular population is especially vulnerable to suicide. And so one of the most important things that I've ever done in my entire life is the Safe UT app. So if you are familiar with the Safe UT app, I'm very happy, and I hope it's on your phone. If you're not, take out your phone. Go ahead, take out your phone. Go to the Google store or to the iTunes store. Find Safe UT, and here's how it works. You put it on your phone, and anywhere in the state of Utah, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you push a button and you get a therapist. Yeah, it's pretty good. See, most people don't know where to turn for help when they're having, thoughts of suicide or when they're struggling with things like that. So there's an app for that. So now to my other area of expertise. I have served for almost 8 years now on the Utah Sentencing Commission. Nobody really thinks about sentencing, right? We just say it's the law. You can't do that. You can't do this. But we don't really talk about what happens if you do, right? So we have different levels of offenses. We have different punishments for different crimes. But Utah actually has one of the best sentencing approaches of all 50 states. And I've learned this the more I've gotten involved with the National Conference of State Legislators, the more I've looked at how other states do things. In Utah, we have what's called indeterminate sentencing, which I know is a big 50-cent word, but it's really cool, and here's how it works. There is a range of punishments depending on the crime committed. So, for example, a third-degree felony, which is the lowest level of felony, how long should you go to jail for that? Trick question, you usually go to prison. But how long should you go to prison for that? Well, in the state of Utah, it depends, right? It could be between 0 and 5 years. And so we have this nifty little matrix, okay? Imagine a graph. And on the upside, you have a criminal history score, okay? How bad is this individual? Right? How many prior offenses do they have? Are any of them violent offenses? Are they currently on probation? Okay? So if you've got somebody who's a really, really bad person, who's been in trouble multiple times, who has multiple felony convictions, who has injured other human beings, they're going to be at the top of this graph. By contrast, if you've got somebody who has never before hurt a fly, they're going to be at the bottom. Are you with me so far? Now, on your horizontal, you have what's called aggravating and mitigating factors. I know this is super dry and kind of boring, but I'm going somewhere with this. So that's how bad are the situations of this crime, okay? So if you are... Do you know what? Let's take a hypothetical. Let's say this young man right here and this gentleman over here, okay? You both are driving, you're both distracted, you both hit a human being and kill them. It wasn't intentional, you didn't do it on purpose, but a person is dead and it's your fault. In Utah, that's a third-degree felony. So how much time should you get? Should you get 0 or should you get 5 years? So here are the two hypotheticals. This gentleman here is an upstanding pillar of the community. You can probably tell. He just looks like a great guy. Never before committed a crime, no criminal history. This guy here got in trouble when he was a kid, right? Got in trouble over and over, has been constantly in and out of jail, has multiple violent offenses, okay? this is just a bad dude, okay? He's currently on probation for armed robbery. You didn't know that when you sat next to him. You probably should have.
I have it expunged, though. It's off my record.
It's not expunged right now. That's how I know. You think I don't check to see who's in a building I'm going to speak at? Come on, man. So that's our up and down, okay? You're at the top of the list. This man's at the bottom, okay? Now, on the aggravating and mitigating factors, okay? This guy is horrified. He immediately stops. Immediately gets out to see if the person's okay, right? Calls 911. Administers first aid, stays, waits, cooperates with first responders, is so remorseful. I remember the first time I learned that remorse was actually an aggravating or mitigating factor, and I remember thinking, are you kidding me? You go to jail longer if you're a dick. How can that be right? And the prosecutor from Sim Gill's office actually explained it to me. He said, you know, that's not why. It's not because they're a jerk. See, he changed the language, I didn't. It's not because they're a jerk. It's because they're less likely to reoffend if they are remorseful. Someone that regrets their decision, someone that makes restitution, someone that tries to make it right, is less likely to offend in the future. By contrast, this guy, this freaking guy over here, he doesn't even stop, right? He just keeps going. It's not his fault. That guy shouldn't have been there. He got in my way. He's not sorry. He didn't try to help the guy. He didn't call for 911. So on the aggravating factor chart, this dude's getting 5 years. Everybody cool with that? Is everybody cool with this guy getting 5 years and that guy getting probation? Is everybody cool with that by show of hands? Right. That's called indeterminate sentencing, okay? So instead of just saying, as some states do, if this happens, you get 2 years in prison, we actually look at the individual. We look at the circumstances, right? We try and protect you from dirtbags. Except when it comes to intentional and deliberate targeting of a victim because of who they are. See, we have hate crime laws, but here's the problem. I don't know if you know this, but you can't prove in a court of law what another human being feels, right? I can prove what they said. I can prove how they acted. But I can't prove you hate someone. Right? Do you know what I can prove? I can prove that you went out of your way to specifically and deliberately target someone because of who they are. I can prove that in court all day long, but I can't prove you hate them. And even if I could, the Supreme Court has ruled over and over and over again that it is unconstitutional to punish someone for unpopular speech or unpopular thoughts or opinions. So why are we having so much trouble getting this done when clearly everybody can see it's the right thing to do? And I'll tell you why. It's because we are stuck 30 years in the past. We keep talking about hate crimes. Well, hate crimes traditionally have been unconstitutional. The first hate crimes only applied to minority populations. Guess what happened when the Supreme Court got a hold of it? It's not equal protection under the law. Some animals are more equal than others, therefore, unconstitutional, it's out. Then you had punishing free speech. You can't violate the First Amendment, it's out. So Republicans tend to keep thinking that that is what we're talking about when we're talking about hate crimes. Well, Wisconsin versus Mitchell fixed all of that by changing the status to, instead of saying minorities, to say if you are targeted because of your race. Every single human being has a race. And don't look now, but every single human being has a sexual orientation. I know it's super embarrassing to talk about. So, by tying the enhanced penalty to the action of intentionally and deliberately selecting a victim based on a protected class, and I've run out of time, so I'll wrap up. By tying it to that, we are 100% constitutionally bulletproof. It's the right way to go. We have a ton of support. Do we have the list of all the different groups that are supporting us? It's like 1 million. It's pretty much everybody in the universe is now supporting us. You'll notice everybody except the LDS Church. Now, let me be clear, because there's a lot of confusion on this. Let me be clear. At no point has the LDS Church opposed this bill. The problem is, what they're saying is no comment. So part of the challenge that we're running into is, why are we asking a church their opinion on a criminal justice issue? Now, and yet, find me a single news report that doesn't bring it up, right? It's our fault. Now, the challenge is, if you don't tell people what your opinion is, other people will be more than happy to tell other people what your opinion is, right? And so we've got folks saying that they're opposed, even though they say no comment. You've got me saying they're not opposed, even though they've said no comment. So it's probably equally bad for me to speak on their behalf. But the reality is, we're making progress. We are getting support. We have had a ton of groups come out and offer their support. And it's going to be coming up in the legislative session here. So what can you do? What you can do is you can contact your legislators and let them know this matters to you. You can contact your legislators and ask them to tell you specifically, if they do not support it, why not? And be kind, be polite, be respectful. It's the best way to get a legislator to show up to your event, even if they're a straight Republican. And yeah, there you go. I'm going to stick around if anybody has questions, but I'm now 4 minutes over. I'm the worst guest ever. Addie.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let's have another round of applause for our speakers. So one more big shout out to our sponsors, Century Financial and Huntsman Family Foundation. So as you probably noticed, there's a really cool step and repeat outside that you can take a selfie in front of. You can hashtag QTalks and follow us at Equality Utah on Instagram and Twitter. Those photos will show up in our feed, and that'll be really cool. Our next QTalks is on Wednesday, May 9th. And thanks again for coming, and be safe driving home. Thanks so much.
Like